Mr. President, now is the time to get back to basics. Federal government does not exist for its own sake. It exists for the people. And if federal regulation serves no useful function for the people, then it only serves to hold back our nation's prosperity and growth. With so many Americans hungry for good-paying jobs, now is the time to unleash our nation's economic potential by getting government out of the way. It's just plain common sense to eliminate regulations that are duplicative, costly, and unworkable. We need to get back to the basics by getting rid of those kinds of regulations, and one of those regulations is the BLM methane rule. Now, the BLM methane rule is one of those midnight regulations that the Obama administration put out as they were walking out the door. This new regulation from the Bureau of Land Management, or BLM, imposes new rules and royalty rates on methane emissions from oil and gas production on federal and on Indian lands. For those wondering why methane emissions aren't already regulated, there's a simple explanation. They are. Under the Clean Air Act, the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, in partnership with individual states, is tasked with regulating air quality, which includes methane emissions. In fact, states like my state of North Dakota, states like the presiding officer's state in Texas, currently have regulatory systems in place to govern oil and gas emissions. Critically, the North Dakota Industrial Commission has put in place flaring requirements that have successfully reduced the flaring in our state from 35% down to 10% as a result of their work. This flaring reduction is a big deal because to reduce, and they have a goal to take it even further. This flaring reduction is a big deal because to reduce methane emissions, you need to reduce flaring. Flaring sounds complicated, but it's very simple. When excess gas is produced along with oil and it can't be captured, then it gets burned off or flared. Now, neither industry nor state officials like flaring because it wastes natural gas. It wastes a natural resource, of which methane obviously is the main component. As most Americans know, obviously, natural gas is a valuable commodity that's used to heat our homes and power our factories. That's why both industry and the states have worked hard to make big improvements. They want to capture that natural gas, that methane. And that's not just in North Dakota. That's other states, energy-producing states across the country. Now, nationally, methane emissions from oil and gas industry have been on the decline now for a number of years, okay? So we're already actively working at the state level under a regulatory regime where states have primacy that's been authorized by EPA to reduce natural gas flaring. With methane emissions already being regulated and reduced by the states and industry, it's tough to figure out why this new BLM regulation has been passed and what it's accomplishing. This rule has been calculated to cost up to $279 million each year. So the cost of this rule is $279 million a year, a duplicative rule. Now, that's in addition to the red tape. BLM estimates that the rule will impose an additional 82,000 hours of paperwork, an additional 82,000 hours of paperwork. These numbers might just sound like the cost of doing business, if you will, but America's job creators know that it's really costing us business. It's costing us economic growth, and it's costing us jobs. These aren't merely numbers. There are livelihoods at stake. What makes the BLM methane rule particularly burdensome is the fact that it's simply unworkable. The rule sets a maximum volume that each well can flare, which will lead to a curtailment and shut-in wells, meaning actually having to shut down the wells. Of course, that decreases oil production and reduces royalty payments. So we get less energy, the owners get less revenue, and we have less jobs. Meanwhile, this rule treats all drilling spacing units the same, regardless of whether they have minimal federal ownership or not. Remember, a lot of these wells you're trying to regulate are on minerals owned by the federal government, but they may also be on minerals owned by private individuals. So once again, you've got one of these federal one-size-fits-all regulations that just doesn't work in practice. And that's why regulating the natural gas, the methane emissions, has been delegated to the states by the EPA, and why it should be up to the states. So the states are fighting back. Wyoming, Montana, and North Dakota filed a legal challenge to the rule in the U.S. District Court in Wyoming. Now, the good news is that the states and our economy should not have to wait until this lawsuit makes its way through the court system. We can provide regulatory relief right now, and we should do so through the Congressional Review Act, CRA, which provides Congress with a tool to rid the nation of burdensome, duplicative regulations like this one. And that's what our schedule is for tomorrow, to take up this CRA. So I'm a co-sponsor of this CRA, and we need to pass it. I want to thank the chairman of the EPW committee, Senator Barrasso, for his work on this issue and others. The House has already passed this CRA. So this has already been passed by the House. The President has expressed his support for it. We need to pass it tomorrow. We need to get this done. Every week I meet with North Dakotans and others who are working so hard to produce energy for this country, to create jobs and a better future for their families. They need and deserve a federal government that won't stand in their way. This is a basic but fundamental objective, and a good place to reduce that regulatory burden, to get our economy going, to create more economic growth, more jobs, higher income levels, is by reducing the regulatory burden, and this is a great example. Again, it's just about common sense. It's about empowering the states to take a states-first approach, a states' primacy approach in terms of this kind of regulation. How we produce energy in Texas or North Dakota or Ohio or Pennsylvania or Washington State, it's different across the country. You can't have a federal one-size-fits-all rule. That's why it needs to be left up to the states. We have a chance tomorrow to pass this measure, and it is exactly the kind of measure that will help reduce that regulatory burden, help us grow our economy, and help us create good jobs. I urge my colleagues to join with us and pass this CRA. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.